Then after being that student hourly, I came on as a natural resources specialist. My workload consisted still of a lot of data management and data analysis. You'll probably see a recurring theme here in the early years of my career with CMOL. But I started to provide a wider variety of project support. Did a little bit of management with the research project, again the second version of that TIM tool, managing staff, a little bit of field project management, still did technical writing. Then there's a wide variety of skills that were involved, and a lot of these, well in particular water quality, air quality, stormwater hydrology, those things were not skills that I had prior to this job. My background is ecology, vegetative ecology, fire ecology, things like that. So I gained a lot of skills just because they were required for the work that I was doing. Variety of data management again and analysis. I started to get into using databases more, using SQL to develop queries. Dave mentioned some of the long-term vegetation monitoring projects we've had. In fact, one that I worked on was for Dave, which was that tracked vehicle study at Orchard Training Area, which is really interesting. And another day, be happy to answer more questions about that, as I'm sure Dave would. I also analyzed some water quality data that we received. And then I was trained with SAS, trained using SAS, and then I taught myself JMP through some webinars and some other things. JMP is great for graphical representations of data. It's really fantastic, and Excel is also good. You know, descriptive statistics are used for basically everything that we do. I mean, it's kind of the backbone. And then we can get into some things like mean separation and ANOVA tests, and then obviously the graphical outputs always go in reports. Yeah?
With all your data wrangling, have you used R?
I have. Yeah, I actually, I went to a conference and did a pre-conference workshop and learned a lot about R during that session. I like it because it's free. I like it because it's open, and there are a lot of people that make modules for R that you can basically download and they're ready to go, and you don't have to do all the coding yourself. But the coding is different enough from SAS that it wasn't as easy of a transition as I thought, because all the little minutiae of SAS that I got used to, those minutiae became different in R. And so it just, I don't know. I like SAS. We are able to get licenses here on campus, and it's an industry standard to a certain extent. So I tend to stick with SAS, and I like to stay up with it. I do use R every once in a while just to be familiar with it, and some other people in the office use R, so it's always good to be able to talk to them about it as well, but for the most part.
Do you see it becoming used more widely in the future?
That depends. Depends on who you're working for and what you're doing, I'd say. If it's a large corporation that can pay for SAS, they'll probably pay for SAS or JMP. JMP is awesome. I actually wholeheartedly endorse JMP. It may not have the power that SAS has or R because it's more graphical interface based. But if you know how to use R, I think you're going to be in a good position. If you go to work for a nonprofit or something like that, that's going to be great for you. Small private company, that'll be great. I think it's definitely a good skill to know, and it'll depend on the path that your career takes, whether or not it'll be used more heavily. Does that make sense?
Yeah. We used to have a rangelands course, several of us in this class, and we'll all be introduced to it the first time.
Good.
And instead of that course, I believe, is traditionally been using Excel.
Oh yeah.
And we've been guinea pigs in a way for this course, and it's kind of changed the tone of
Sure.
the entire course.
You know, I think if you're getting experience with R over Excel, I think that's okay, because my perspective is in this day and age, a lot of people who have made it this far in their academic career know Excel pretty well and know its limits. It's not limited, but in my experience, its limits are descriptive statistics. That's what it's really good at. But you start getting to large data sets and things like that, Excel does not excel. Is that? Yeah. I did a lot more project support for a variety of projects. So we did some groundwater work up in Alaska, stormwater asset survey and assessment in Hawaii. I did some work for Dave on the natural resource condition assessments. helped write and reorganize an integrated natural resource management plan at Bellows Air Force Station, vegetation mapping, and fuel model development for guinea grass. And so this is the groundwater quality monitoring at JBER. This was not something I had much experience with prior to this project, and I kind of jumped into it and said, yeah, let's do this. And with the help of one of my colleagues who was there and had worked on this previously, she really taught me everything I need to know, and this was a really interesting project for me. So I was very fortunate to be able to have this opportunity to do this. The Stormwater Asset Survey and Assessment, we call it the Pop and Lids project. We basically walked all over the installation and recorded every single stormwater point. So there's a crew of 3 to 4 of us at any given time. You can see this curb inlet here. This guy is taking a survey point. This is survey grade equipment. You take the point, it's accurate to within centimeters, I believe. He actually has to sit there for about 30 seconds while it collects a variety of points, and then it makes them into one point. He actually has a gigantic boom that's probably 20 feet down that is taking images and video up and down the sewer lines looking for damage and obstructions, things like that. And I just happen to be the guy who is carrying the cones and the pry bars in that picture. That's why I'm smiling, because I'm not really doing much right there. But we would rotate, so we all learned the process. We learned how to use the equipment. There's another guy who had an iPad, and he was doing all of the asset tracking on the iPad, which is really interesting. The iPad's become a huge tool for us in our office. With the NRCAs that Dave was doing, just to give you an idea, we'd look at different resources or different like air quality, water quality, vegetation, night skies, climate change, things of that nature. And the idea is that we wanted to give them a condition status. And so these different colors indicate the status, arrows indicate a trend in the condition, and then I think importantly, maybe most importantly, is there's the confidence in assessment. And there are some Park Service properties that have a lot of data on the various things. Water quality in particular is one. Air quality had a little bit, and those were the two that I primarily dealt with. So some properties had a lot of data available, and you could actually come up with a decent condition status and trend and be fairly confident in that assessment. But there are some that had almost no data, and it was clear that they were missing data, and you just kind of leave the circle like this, there's not enough data. And that's, I'm assuming they would go back and look at that and say, okay, well, as we get funding for it, we should probably address this. Really interesting project. This is Bellows Air Force Station. I was stationed here for 2 weeks. It was a tough job. Actually, it was.
It's one of my favorite places on the entire planet.
Bellows?
Yeah.
Yeah, so if you're not familiar with Bellows, it's an MWR facility for the Air Force. MWR is Morale, Welfare, Recreation. There is some training that the Marine Corps does on Bellows, but for the most part, it's an MWR facility. But they have...
You have to be active or
retired.
To go
Except on the
and stay there.
weekend.
Except on weekends.
Oh, right.
It's open to the
Day,
public
any
there.
day?
Yeah.
Right.
It's a beautiful place. But they have a lot of natural resource and cultural resource management issues that they deal with. And so I was stationed there for 2 weeks, talking with, meeting with the natural resource manager, talking about different aspects that they needed to include in an updated version of their integrated natural resource management plan. So I got to work closely with them. It was actually difficult because I was in an office for 8 hours rather than playing on that beach. I got to drive past it on the way in and out of the office. But I did get a tour, and there's some really interesting things that are going on there. And this is just a view looking down from the ridge line that is just, I believe, to the north of Bellows. So you can kind of get a feel for what that space is like. Vegetation mapping, this is another project I helped Dave with. He did a vegetation map for the Bighorn Canyon National Recreation Area. And you can see the idea is you digitize all of these different signatures. So you can see there's, I don't know if that's either shrub or a pine or something like that, probably shrubbery in here, grassland. And you digitize all those by hand based on the imagery. And then Dave and some other folks went out and did some ground truthing on it. This is the fuel model project that we worked on. This is guinea grass. I mentioned before it's about 3 meters tall. That's a tall man that's right there. He's like 6'2", I think. and that guinea grass is well above his head. It creates an enormous fuel layer and fire hazard. It's unbelievable. We did a variety of things to try to determine fire behavior, fire temperatures, things like that. The picture on the left there, that's actually a military ammo box that we converted into a protective housing for our thermocouples and sensors that we had placed in the soil. We were looking at heat flux into the soil. So that was a pretty interesting project as well that I had to learn a lot about. And then did some project management stuff. I'm going to kind of breeze through these because we're getting close here. The second round of the tracer ignition minimization tool, I basically ran it for the second time around, managed staff, collected fuels, coordinated with Fort Collins Natural Areas to collect fuels. We tested 3 different fuels this time around instead of just guinea grass. We tested smooth brome, which we're collecting on the left side, and cheatgrass, which we're collecting on the right side, and longleaf pine needles, which came to us from Eglin Air Force Base. And we did the same thing, created a logistic regression. This time, though, we took what we learned from the previous version and made this one a little bit better. And so our ignition device, we had 2 of them this time, and they were on tracks, and this was sort of R&D process for that. There's this track that it runs across, and then one of the ignition devices would swivel, and you push a button and it goes for about 1 second, which is approximately the burnout time that Picatinny Arsenal told us, 1,000 degrees Celsius, and you can see one of the test beds on fire right there. In this iteration, we had 20 experimental units per test run, which really improved the power that we had in the data analysis. Had a really interesting project. Somebody basically saw me in the hall one day and said, "Hey, I've got this project that you might be interested in." And I said, "Sure, I'm always interested in projects." And it turned out that there's this assessment of urban snow, basically meltwater quality. So up in Alaska, they have, there being a high latitude, a lot of times throughout the winter, snow doesn't melt. It just accumulates from where they take it off the roadways in the cantonment areas, and they put it in these piles, and then it becomes a non-point source of pollution eventually. And unfortunately for them, one of the snow piles was located right next to Ship Creek, which is a 303 delisted stream for fecal coliform and turbidity. And that was a big concern for them. So they had us come out there and do some sampling. These are pictures of one of the snow sites between, it was either 2011, 2012, or 2012, 2013, I can't remember. Same site from almost the same location where I took the first picture, but they had a record snowfall year, the second year, and that was just an enormous pile of snow. That's probably this piece right here, and certainly this one back here is double overhead, the Suburban that we had rented to do the field work. It was an impressive effort. The picture with my colleague on the left there was a snow pile that was right next to the creek, and with the water quality samples that we took, the analysis came back with elevated levels of fecal coliform above the EPA standards. So they actually shut that site down. They stopped dumping snow there, and to my knowledge, they haven't dumped any more snow there since then. So it was a really neat project to see something actionable come from that.
Why would it be fecal coliform from the snow?
Good question. Good question. I can only speak anecdotally. I don't know the actual reason, but there's pet waste. People walk their dogs. There's wildlife. In one of the snow pile areas that we found, we sampled a second time in the spring. So we sampled twice. The first time was like, "Hey, here, go do this." Did the best I could, but I learned a ton from that. And so the second time, I revamped the sampling methodology and everything, went back there in the spring, and as everything was melting, we found tons of diapers. Like people's trash bags from their home they got caught up in the snow removal process, and there were just diapers littering this place, and we were like, "Oh my, this is nasty." So that could have something to do with it. It's possible. But the overall point is, you get all that snow and you never know what's in it, and they're putting it into one area, so it does become kind of like a non-point source. This E-Plan project that I had, I won't go into too much detail. Basically, we had to take management plans from the Air Force and reorganize them to meet a standard format, and then put them into this system called E-Plan. It was time-consuming. The E-Plan system is antiquated, was developed by Booz Allen Hamilton, I think in the late 90s or early 2000s, and there are so many better solutions for what this is intended to do now. So I got to work with the Pacific Air Command Chief of Natural Resources on this and Natural Resources Program Manager, and basically just told them that I don't like the system, it's not really doing what you want it to do, and it's a huge waste of time. And that was what it was, and you know, they fortunately listened to that, but there's nothing they could do about it. But we still went through and we reorganized all these documents. On the bright side, I got to go through tons of documents and read about the management, both natural resources and cultural resources, at all these different installations within the Pacific Air Command of the Air Force, which was really informative and educational. I was also the lead on the vegetation mapping at Camp Williams. So whereas I just did imagery interpretation for Dave for the Bighorn Canyon, I was actually responsible for one of 4 Army National Guard sites for this larger project, and mine was Camp Williams. So I did all of the, myself and 2 to 3 other staff members helped me with the field work, all of the delineating. I did all of the coordination with the POCs and everything. This project in particular really helped set me up to become the principal investigator because of everything that I learned in that process. It was almost top to bottom from the time that we got the project to the time I mailed them the deliverables. It was a great experience. And this was Camp Williams. It was not an awful place to work either. This is the top of a ridge line. You can kind of see some of the differences in the vegetation between rangeland and Gamble Oak and Pinyon Juniper. There's a lot of Gamble Oak here. And so we would go out and we'd ground truth. You know, we delineate polygons on the imagery, and then we'd put in points. We're like, well, I'm not really sure if this is what I think it is. So we'd go out and we'd check those points. And we walked all over this installation, which is really impressive. And one of the benefits of that is that you get to see some really pretty things, and this is one of my all-time favorite pictures that I took doing field work there, looking at the Indian paintbrush and the mountain range in the background. Beautiful.
A photon walks into a hotel and the desk clerk says, "Can we help you with your luggage?" And the photon says, "No thanks, I'm traveling light."